want to get some more of those flyers that they have, because they just give a thumbnail reading of Buckminster Fuller that's really good. I want to get some more. I got to get over there just to get some more of those little flyers to get around to people.
Right.
But it's a great show. Glad this is all get together. It's been a great week, and I'm glad you could make it here.
Thanks for inviting us.
My great good pleasure, and welcome very much to Conversation. We have a program today with two people who are involved in a major week of activity in New York City, including, I guess, in the Hallmark kind of way, the opening of the new display, the new exhibit at the Whitney Museum, honoring the memory of a major figure, intellectual, Buckminster Fuller. They're both, and so as am I, and anybody who watches Conversations is a great adherent. And it's been a great week. All kinds of seminars going on, and we're sort of ending it up now, doing some programming. And gentlemen, welcome. Let me introduce you. And on my far left is Andrew Charles help me out.
Yanoviak.
Yanoviak, and he is a technical consultant and so forth. He'll be talking about things he knew Buckminster Fuller. We're going to talk some about that in a personal way. And Andrew, welcome very, very much to Conversation. Immediate left is Peter Meisen. And he is particularly interested, if I'm not mistaken, looking over the materials you gave me, interested in the electric grid, among other aspects of technological development. It was something Bucky Fuller had great ideas on that too, and other matters as well. And so, and he's from San Diego, and this gentleman, Andrew, is from the Hawaii, of all places. Paradise on earth, I'm told. But gentlemen, welcome very, very much to Conversations.
Thank you.
Thank you, Harold.
Maybe we'll start off with Andrew, if you would. You, cause I'm not sure if it was the case with you, Peter. If you knew the man, Buckminster.
Met him twice.
Met him twice. It's sort of like
more of in a presentation.
Yeah, my sort of thing too. But you knew him more. You used to meet him at airports and things like that. But maybe you could share a little of your background in a thumbnail way, born and raised, that sort of thing, and then a little bit of the man, and then we'll come to to Peter in that way, and then we'll talk about specifics as far as the projects you're involved in. But could you share just a little bit of your own background, please?
Sure, I'd be very happy to, Harold. I was born and raised outside of Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, in a small place called Aldham. And I met Bucky for the very first time in 1955 when I was a freshman at Penn State. And some people have mentioned heretofore that he spoke for 4 hours at a time. Well, on that particular session, he spoke for 3 solid days, morning, afternoon, and evening.
Yeah, and it was all good talk if you could understand all the seemingly run-on sentences as he connected all kinds of aspects of a comprehensive consciousness.
Yes, that's correct. I worked on a bread truck as a young boy. I dealt with people from Hungary, Slovakia, Poland, Germany, Russia, and Italy, and I could not understand him. I was able to understand multilingual people. However, when it came to Bucky, I was there as a freshman in architecture, stayed the very first hour, that was our release, and then I attempted to stay another hour, and I was told I couldn't do that, but I did it anyhow. Then I ended up staying for the entire morning and was advised by the chairman of the Department of Architecture that that was it for me, that I was one of the 105 students that had flunked out. They promised that there would only be 50 left to go into the sophomore year.
I see.
So subsequently I advised my parents, and then I went to the Dean of Engineering and got reinstated in architecture.
All right, and you did, and you followed through on that, and you decided to move to the great state of Hawaii after trying to figure out where you wanted to live, and came upon that state, and you've been there for a long while?
That's correct. My wife
you
and I...
have a very appropriate shirt, if I may. It looks very Hawaiian.
Well, thank you.
Yes.
My wife and I researched the world for 2 solid years to decide where we wanted to go. And what we really liked about Hawaii was the aloha spirit.
Aloha spirit. That's a welcoming spirit.
Welcoming spirit, and also the communion between all peoples of all races, all nationalities. very homogeneous world.
It is right in the
Yes,
middle of
it
the
is.
Pacific,
Yes.
crossroads of the world in a very real sense. And I've not been. That's the only 2 states I've not been. That's one I haven't been. But anyway, welcome. And then I wonder also you now, Peter. You're from another place that I think of in terms of weather and climate as paradise. That being San Diego, California. The La state, some people say. It gets a bad rap sometimes. But hey, were you raised there and so forth? Or?
I was fortunate. I grew up in Southern California. My parents actually met in Brooklyn, and this was during the war years, but my father was in education, and through Ole Miss and Stanford ultimately found their home in Oceanside, California, which is where I was born and raised.
They were out of Mississippi?
No, out of Brooklyn.
Oh, out of Brooklyn.
Yeah.
Ole Miss. He went to.
He taught at Ole Miss for a year.
What did he teach, if I may?
He was a history professor.
History. There's a lot of it.
And then he, when he got to California, became an administrator in the local community college system, and for the rest of his life, he was the vice president of the local community college.
So you were raised in Southern California.
Yes.
The climate, it's La Jolla? There's a place, La Jolla, I was, where the Salk Institute was?
That's correct.
And every day is like perfect.
Yes, it is.
It seems, in a certain sense. I mean, it's really good. I'm from Michigan. We used to have these awful winters and so forth.
I never shoveled snow a day in my life, and I don't own a coat. I own a nice.
Stop it! I mean, we have to change all the time. But on the other hand, there is something to be said for diversity.
Yes.
I mentioned to you we lived in Medellin, Colombia, for 6 months doing a master's thing on Antioquia or Medellin, and it's perfect there. Bougainvillea, and there were some people from Minnesota who had been there for a decade or so, and they said they did get bored with perfect. I told them I thought I would like to experiment getting bored with perfect, but they said they kind of missed the change and so forth, because the seasonal change is something that's an interesting thing to shake things up a bit.
And I was fortunate. Bucky came through and on his many lecture tours around the world in 1971, and I was a high school student at the time, a senior in high school, and my dad was at the community college, and he said, "Come on, you got to hear this guy talk." I had no idea who Buckminster Fuller was, and I was a fairly bright kid, but I had one of the similar experiences as many. I was in this 3-hour lecture, and I was amazed. I was probably bored at times because I just wasn't mature enough to really understand what he said, other than I knew it was really important. That's what I got.
You did grasp that at a young age, 16, 17?
I was 18, and I knew that this was profound, what I had just experienced, but I couldn't tell you what he said.
You can't think of what year would that have been around?
1971.
71. That was a very magic time, if I may, in the evolution of the universal zeitgeist, in my opinion. I think that was a very major moment in the evolution of consciousness, myself, that period.
And I was fortunate in 1983, right before he died a few months, I was invited to a Hunger Project board meeting in Los Angeles, where he was a guest speaker at the board meeting.
Werner Erhard?
That's right.
Yeah,
and well, he was a founder, co-founder of the Hunger Project, and so Bucky was a speaker. They only gave him a half hour, which was difficult.
Impossible.
And I hung on every word. And somebody asked the question, Bucky, what should we do? And that was, and rarely did he answer the question directly. It was always, look what's wanted and needed in the world and go do that was the normal answer. He didn't want to give people direction. But the thing that he said was, because he just finished the book Critical Path.
Yeah, man. He was getting very, if we could, he was moving toward, out of his writings in the past, he was moving toward what could be construed as, in a certain sense, a political reading of things, that and Grunch of Giants.
Right.
Those
and
things
so
he was talking about the pirates who run the world and using that kind of language.
Pirates as the big corporate
the corporate
animal.
fellows, or the leaders who always run the world in all of history, I would think. You studied history?
Some,
yeah.
So he admonished everybody at that meeting to read Critical Path. And
great book.
And that's where I finally got to the work that I do, and I finally read it in 1986, and that's what started me on the work that I do.
Did you read some of the other stuff? Could you get through Synergetics and so on?
I have not ever gotten through
It's like getting through Ulysses, James Joyce. I mean, it's another language, really, in a sense. But he was and he wanted to encourage people to be a comprehensive. Let me digress for a minute. We're talking about a lovable person. In my humble opinion, perhaps he could make a claim for being the most important human being in the history of mankind. in my humble opinion. But I had done this work in Colombia, and I came back. Well, actually, it was from Bolivia. I came back, and television was black and white still, I remember, back to Detroit where I was raised. And there came on the television 2 people in 1 week. It was a short period of time. One of them was Bucky Fuller, and the other one was Marshall McLuhan up in Toronto studying media effects and so forth. And they both sit, in a certain sense, talking to intellectuals or young people or whatever, and they're talking to academics perhaps, dare to be a comprehensivist, he called it. Be interested in everything. If you note the curriculum at our universities, there is no department of everything, because everything was galloping with linear regression computers and so forth towards specialization, and specialization is the hallmark of it. And Bucky's noted that you get the best minds so specialized out, they can't think about the big patterns what you're looking for.
Can't see the
and
forest
can become
of the
a
trees.
threat to the pirates that run the world. And they set up graduate schools deliberately to co-opt the best minds coming up so they couldn't become a threat to those people who think comprehensively and are comfortably running the world as always they have. Interesting take on things.
Yes.
You know? We don't. Okay, I just wanted to throw that in and so forth. So I was impressed with that. I was in geography. In geography, you can get away with being interested in anything.
Well, he said
without being specialized.
The more and more you get specialized, the potential for becoming obsolete exists, because there's always somebody coming out with a new technology or a better way of doing things that makes your specialty no longer needed. So you can be without a job oftentimes when you become over-specialized fairly easily.
On the contrary, if I may, that's the way you get a job.
Well, that's the way you get a job.
To develop a new department of how to use the pluperfect tense in 13th century French literature in the south of the country. Then you can set up a department. But if you're talking about how to operate a spaceship Earth or trying to talk comprehensive, there's no place for you within the academy, because it's too, you couldn't possibly understand all the nuance of what the specialist comes up with that has to be delved with, if you understand what I'm saying.
Sure.
Whereas he's looking at broad patterns.
Yes.
And encouraging people to do that, it seems to me.
Yeah.
And I think we need more of that personally. But
the more we all become generalists, the better.
Generalists, or do you like his term? Do you? Do you like, Andrew? Do you like the term comprehensivist? That's a term he came up with. I tried to put it on the graphics for my thing, and the spell check wouldn't recognize the word.
I understand. I can appreciate that.
That's not the first word he's coined.
Right. Microsoft Word is limited. You know, we were way back many years ago with IBM limited to 4-letter words. Remember those days? Okay.
Yeah.
But we are progressing, and I think eventually it will be in the dictionary. But comprehensiveness and generalists, architects are by nature generalists, unless they specialize in industrial facilities or institutional hospitals, for example, or university buildings. But for the most part, the field of architecture is very general. Okay. You're dealing with so many different kinds of people and uses of space and facilities and so forth. So you're forced to be a generalist as well as a specialist.
And we put architecture in the realm of art.
Not necessarily.
Well, in a certain sense, it seems to be the queen of the arts in terms of having an influence on the built environment as opposed to poetry or painting. But it is an art, but it's also a science.
That's
correct. It bridges them,
That is correct. It's been said that it's the mother of the arts.
Is it? It has?
It has been said that, yes.
Send me that quote, would you?
Yes, I've written it in an article on Noguchi's sculpture in Honolulu, and I'll send that to you.
Okay, I appreciate that very much, you know. And you've been working as a consultant and so forth, and then I know you're very involved with among other things. You got a number of people working with you, and then you're also very involved with electricity and the grid and so forth. And we're going to show a clip that you have of that. It's a very well put together thing. But maybe you can go off on that now. Is that a particular thing you're focusing on, the electric grid and the importance of electricity in terms of the human condition?
Well, I mentioned Critical Path as a book, and I had finally got around to reading this, like I said, in 1986. I was looking for the next project in my life. In a few years before, I had co-founded a fairly large program in San Diego that had gone nationally. It had to do with food distribution and
Off the Hunger Project?
Related. And I was engineer by training.
You were an engineer, I was going to ask.
Yeah, University of California at San Diego.
You studied architecture, right?
Yes, that is correct.
Right, okay.
Architecture and real estate development.
Well, those are two biggies, yeah, okay, yeah.
So on page 206 of Critical Path, I'm reading through this, and when you understand the world game proposal that he had actually, and it actually developed back in the early days of, and later days of the 60s, which posed the question, how do you provide a decent living standard for everybody on the planet, and how do you do it sustainably? That's sort of paraphrasing the world game purpose statement.
Yeah, right.
How do you, quality life for 6.5 billion people in an environmentally sustainable way.
Heading for 10.
That's right. And the #1 strategy that came out of that question from the early days of the world game, and I assert even more necessary today, was to interconnect the electrical systems between regions, between countries around the world. Half of it's already built already.
Half is built.
Half is already built. This interconnected.
There's a world grid.
So ultimately to interconnect all countries so that everybody has the benefit when they flip a switch of lighting and computers and refrigeration.
Just think about electricity is essential. If the electricity went out, it would be
everything shuts down.
Yeah, everything would shut down.
New York has had that experience a few
we had
times.
A blackout,
but
remember,
that's right. But it's not just the interconnection side of this which is critical, because the grid is the freeway for electricity. There's also the other half of this is the renewable side of it, because today 2/3 of our electrical generation comes from fossil fuels, 16% from hydro, 16% from nuclear, and that's what's creating the pollution and the CO2 emissions that we're all aware of.
Nuclear creates waste.
Sure.
It creates waste, yeah.
So essentially linking renewable resources around the world is the core of what we work on with our institute. And there are 6 renewables: solar, wind, hydro, geothermal, ocean energies, and biomass. And they are massively abundant around the world, but not always where we work and live. They're oftentimes in remote locations, sometimes in a neighboring country. So that's how transmission enables you to connect up that renewable and to be a green energy customer wherever you live.
And did I read on some of your papers that they can now transmit? Was it 3,000 kilometers? 7,000 kilometers?
7,000 kilometers.
Effectively and economically.
That's correct.
With high
voltage
incredible. DC. That's an incredible new development. This is characteristic of the recent experience that they can do that.
It's actually
economically.
Studies from the early '90s have done that distance, and those were the effective economic distances of the technology of those essentially those conductors of the day, the aluminum copper alloy that we use for transmission. And we can actually go further today.
Could you do further with repeaters or something like that if you had to?
Sure.
Okay, that's a hugely important thing, don't you think? And your company and you are involved with making that known to people and to building out some systems, perhaps, and so forth.
Well, the challenge is we have approximately 200 nations in the world, but most energy ministers and the policymakers in that country normally think up to their political boundaries, right?
Of course,
because that's who voted them in, and that's their responsibility.
That's the level of sovereignty, more or less recognized out of history. Yeah.
When we have a technology that goes this far, but political thinking goes this far.
Yes.
So that's our challenge with our organization, is to inform policymakers, utilities, and really those business leaders that we can now interconnect between nations reliably. And in a trusting way. There's a concept around national security that goes on with this as well. But when you start interconnecting across borders, for example, New York is and the rest of our country is heavily connected into Canada. There are 100 interconnections in Canada, which is mutually beneficial to us and to them. We buy a lot of hydropower, which is cheap as an electricity source.
Right.
Dollars go back to them. It's beneficial to both. That same relationship ought to occur with every nation around the world.
Yeah, and it's part of a sustainable development capability, tapping in some of these alternative resources. A lot of those possibilities are probably coming into practicality. With you got oil at $140 a barrel, it's a lot different. For a long time, it was fixed for us at $20 a barrel, and so that's going to make a lot of room for things that previously been thought to be hopelessly inefficient in economic terms, I presume.
It's important to understand that almost all oil goes into the transportation sector. Very little goes into actually power production.
Is that right?
But it wakes everybody up to the alternatives, and the alternatives really are the renewables, which are, again, massively abundant on our planet. What's happened in the last decade that wind and solar especially have become cost competitive in many uses. Wind turbines have become very, very large. They're 100 meters tall.
Yeah.
The rotors are 60 meters. They're cost competitive
60
now.
60 meters, that's huge.
You've seen these turbines if you travel.
They just announced on the news yesterday, Britain has a big thing where they're going to put them offshore and that kind of stuff and everything.
20% by 2020. California is going to be 20% renewable by 2020. Both
renewable, including all of those you ticked off?
Yes.
20% by 2020.
Correct.
You would have thought we might have been able to move faster than that, but it's hard. The drag of history is, and all those old systems have to be amortized and so forth in the business models.
That's
and
right.
So forth.
But there are 5 nations today in the world that are almost all renewable. So this is doable. Iceland, Norway, New Zealand, Brazil, and Canada.
What about France? They get 90% or 70% of electricity from atomic energy.
I wouldn't call that renewable.
You do not call that renewable.
Correct.
Why do you set that off? Because it does not pollute outside of the waste. If you could get the waste problem done, then that would be a place for us to put our outdated intercontinental ballistic missile-topped atomic weaponry as fuel, which would be a very nice metaphor, possibly. Why are we so against atomic energy because of that? And is there any hope for fusion? We've always heard, ever since I've been born, they're going to get to fusion, and when we get to fusion, we're going to have unlimited energy. You haven't researched that, or have you?
Sure.
Yeah.
Since we're talking about Buckminster Fuller, and this is a week of his ideas, let's speak about it as he did. He said we all need nuclear power to survive as humans, but the safe distance for humans is 93 million miles away. The sun. The sun is a nuclear fission reaction that enables us to live on planet Earth.
Correct.
But every nuclear power reactor is the first step toward creating a nuclear weapon potentially. So that's the first process in the line. And the waste product is the most toxic substance that we've ever created on mankind that has a 25,000-year half-life. And we still don't have a real safe way to protect that for the short term, let alone for millennia to come.
21,000 years is a long time.
That's a long, long time.
Yeah, that's a long time. Yeah,
and so if you have other viable options in the renewable spectrum that don't create any pollution, that essentially you harvest Mother Nature's wind, Mother Nature's sun, the steam coming out of the ground, the tides, the waves. If you can harvest those income energy resources, he called them, as opposed to digging and burning our capital account, isn't that a much smarter way to keep the lights on, to run our cars ultimately? Because the car spectrum, we ultimately, if we go back to oil, want to get off burning fossil fuels for that, not only because it's expensive, but it creates CO2. We want to move toward ultimately a clean energy transport sector, which more than likely at the end of this is going to be a hydrogen fuel or an electric car being powered by renewable resources.
I think we still need some battery technology improvements, perhaps, to make that mass production thing available. We have a problem with the waste material because the Yucca Mountain doesn't seem to. I got an idea for that.
Okay.
Why don't we locate a big hole near San Diego, and we'll put all the waste material, we'll gather it all up there and put it there right next to San Diego, right next to the Salk Institute, and bury all our waste there in San Diego. Would you be up for promoting that at the San Diego Chamber of Commerce?
I don't think we'd accept it.
I don't think nobody wants that stuff around.
That's
that's a problem. But that's really interesting. We'll get back to it. We're going to show a film clip you have of that in just a couple of minutes. But Andrew, we've been talking here. You were in architecture and so forth, and what is it you're developing? You do a lot of things having to do with code questions of real estate and that sort of thing, but you're doing it from a perspective as a real estate person, but also as a Bucky Fuller engineering person. Maybe you could talk a little bit about what you're doing, because you have a going business out there in Hawaii, and maybe you could talk a little bit the way he's been talking about this energy issue with a patina, and more than a patina, good depth of grounding in Buckminster Fuller.
Oh, I've been enamored by what Peter's been saying, too, because you've heard of Nikola Tesla.
Of course.
And there's an avenue named after him here near Madison Square in New York.
He died in the New Yorker building, right just a half a block from where I live.
All right.
Yeah.
So that's a part of history.
Yeah, that's history, yeah.
But, you know, he was able to send electricity without, this was all of his concept and his principles with regard to not using transmission lines. And the United States Army has done some experiments on Hawaii where they've been able to send electricity from one island to another.
Really?
Without a cable.
Really?
Yes, really. They're up to 57 miles now is where they can transmit.
How is that done? That's done through some wave technology or something?
Yeah, when you ask how, we don't understand Buckminster fully right now.
Yeah.
As I wrote in a letter to the editor for the New Yorker recently, it may even take a half of a millennium to understand Bucky.
Half of a millennium, that's 500 years?
Yes. To understand Bucky fully. Yes. And the other aspect of this is Tesla. Never understood. Yeah, Edison, Westinghouse, they've been understood, and their ideas have been considered more practical, but they're also more polluting. It's a major problem.
AC, DC differences and so forth, and the electricity. And Tesla's a famous person in terms of that. And then the market comes along and so forth. And apropos of that, maybe, I'm not sure if it is, you set me straight, I'm just going to put a plug in for the movie WALL-E, which is out now. Major movie, I think, from Pixar, animated. It's going to be a blockbuster. And the theme of it generally is that you have humanity's been wiped out. There's no humanity on Earth, and there's just this one robot going around that's still, it was programmed to pick up trash and things like that, and Wally's wandering around in this scorched Earth with no human beings left at all. And I wonder on some of those wave technologies that you have, the leading edge of technological development, funding and so forth, the leading edge of all of that, very often done for corporate or for other reasons, is in the realm of weapons technology. And we've managed to develop weapons technology. And are there wave weapons technologies that we maybe coming off the Strategic Defense Initiative, Star Wars encouragement that Mr. Reagan did in order to help bring down the Soviet Union and that geopolitical struggle? Are there weapons systems that are overwhelmingly powerful, perhaps liberating in their potential for but are also perhaps not aware? We're aware of the hydrogen bomb, we're aware of a lot of germ warfare, other things that they develop in the warfare mentality, which motivates most of the research of most of the countries and has. And are there waveform systems that have a destructive potentiality? Because the theme of WALL-E is that we now have, as Buckminster Fuller said, we have the option for either utopia or oblivion. We do have, according to the modeling, the capability now for the first time since about 1970 with weapon systems that exist, that if they were to be unleashed in a spasm of hatred that we've been demonstrating for 200,000 years of human evolution, fighting one for another, the ability to unleash weapons in about a half an hour that would eliminate the human species. Some of these systems that are connecting in a positive vein, the islands of the Hawaii and so forth, do they have a weapons side, destructive capability that maybe the citizens aren't that aware of? And we want the citizens to become aware of a lot of these things you're talking about in order to encourage the political and business community, perhaps in order to make decisions toward a living repattern, rather than muddling through to where we unleash this destructive capability that the movie WALL-E calls into attention. But I just wonder, the wave things where you connect the islands, is there a connection there or not?
Well, most military research is highly classified.
Yes.
So we may not learn about what is currently being worked on or tested for another quarter century or more.
If we have that long.
Yes. But as you know, the U.S. military is global, very global. Very global. And as you know, as a geographer, in terms of your particular background, they select certain portions of the world to conduct their experiments.
Marshall Islands in '54.
Well,
they knew that was going to go down on the Marshall Islands, left the people there in order to test the effects of Teller's hydrogen bomb. Mm-hmm. Good movie about that. But go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yes, well, you're entirely correct, Harold. And, you know, furthermore, they have been testing and are currently testing, for example, on the island of Kauai, offshore, with regard to firing missiles and shooting other missiles down. So you don't think of the Hawaiian Islands that way. But there is a Oceania type of orientation to all of this too, which involves, as you mentioned, the Marshall Islands and Micronesia, as well as Polynesia and Melanesia. So it involves whales and dolphins, etc. You know, the radar domes floating on the ocean and so forth. There's highly advanced military research, but I think that the Bucky Fuller's notions and indications toward livingery rather than weaponry, as you know, in the U.S. budget, the defense budget is a major portion of that particular budget.
I'm not sure what it is in terms of gross domestic product. I think it's been larger in the past in terms of gross domestic product ratios with defense spending. In fact, we're even depleted of the ability to send our boys overseas. In a certain sense, that's advantageous, but we can't send our boys off to be killed. There were 58,000 in Vietnam that were killed by the mistake that the United States made, or the leaders made. They weren't able to come. And they still don't have a vision adequate to what the future requires in a liberating context for all the people. We still don't have an operating manual for Spaceship Earth at the business, governmental, leadership level of the world, because they're all wrapped up with institutions that would, in a certain sense, be outdated by the requirements of the zeitgeist in terms of what the future requires in a liberated context, rather than one that is essentially oppressive in its institutional assumptions of all its institutions inherited out of history. Or am I off base on that?
No, I think you're
Mr. What's his name? Oliver Stone, his favorite book was Critical Path. Critical Path was saying it's a critical path. There's a time of break point. And so I just wonder, what do you think generally? Is that a pattern that is true, or
well, I've seen, and I'll use Bucky's terms. We talked about going from weaponry to livingery. In the more vernacular, it's taking a military technology and moving it into the general use. And not too long ago, you could not get a GPS off the shelf because this was classified technology to actually pinpoint, locate where you were at a place on the planet within a few feet, a few yards, right?
Yeah. Right.
And now we can walk around with them on our cell phone.
I know, it's amazing.
Or on a handheld Garmin, on a boat or an RV to say where am I on a street, anywhere in the world.
Amazing, isn't it? Yeah.
We do take some of the best research that sometimes is 2-3 decades old, correct, before it moves into the general public use and becomes widespread and used by all. The goal, I think, of Fuller's ideas was to stop putting so much emphasis on, if you will, the war games of the world, which is he actually.
That's the world game was the opposite.
Well, that was the opposite because
exactly,
he was in World War I and saw that some of the best technology and research was going into shooting further missiles and ballistics, and that why not flip that upside down instead of doing war games for the purpose that we still play today into this concept of the world game, and the whole purpose statement was how to make the world work for 100% of humanity in the shortest possible time through spontaneous cooperation without ecological offense or disadvantage to anyone.
Beautiful mission statement for humanity. I mean, that's something that could be adopted. We don't see it enough, do we? As a mission statement, all corporations have a mission statement. That's a beautiful mission statement for the purpose of mankind in this part of the universe. I would submit it ought to be on every schoolroom wall.
I'm agreeing with you, and to use that Dymaxion map that he developed, which shows a much more accurate version of the world without any distortion of shapes and sizes.
I'm very sensitive to that as a geographer.
All right.
Yeah.
It's the most
best map. Yeah.
It is. It's the most accurate flat map where you can then overlay these issues of population and energy use in a way that people can see those relationships of those issues years and hopefully make much more sustainable decisions for us all.
Better than any of our think tanks in a sense, because the think tanks are all financed by people who have an agenda, political or otherwise. That's still the thing that operates in those realms by and large. And they, by and large, those who own the capital assets, set the templates for all our institutions, educational, think tanks. And if you don't hew to their view, you're going to lose your grant, or you're going to lose your tenure, or you're going to lose something that is going to be, it's still controlled by the great masters of that run everything as it always has. So we need something kind of new that has to emerge, and it's on a very large pattern that we need something new. And we live at a time of qualitative transformation and the evolution of events in this part of the universe. Can we get off and draw off like Lovelock and begin to look at the Earth as an organism? We can begin to see the Earth as a whole system. We got 6 billion people. Your electric grid serves well us, the 20% that are living well. We're served well. We depend upon it. But a good deal of humanity, Joseph Stiglitz and others will tell us, are wallowing around in the mud of absolute abject poverty.
25%.
And the trends are wrong.
25%, 1.6 billion people.
Yeah, and the assets, they're not taken care of, nor are they thought of as being very relevant, because everybody's trying to get in on the hedge fund investment in the latest thing that's going to make a fortune for them and their colleagues, rather than thinking about an economic system that serves all, is really truly democratic rather than plutocratic, as is currently the system by which responsibility is assumed by the so-called leadership of the world. It needs to be challenged in a fundamental way from the people, or is that reaching for something that's beyond the muddling through tendency we all have to just go along with what history's given us?
I think the United Nations, which does represent all of us at some level, has created some Millennium Development Goals that were essentially 8 target numbers.
Agenda 21.
Correct. That it said, and I wish it was much more aggressive in its target. It said we wanted to have the amount of poverty essentially in the world by 2015. That's a good target, but I'd certainly love to go.
That was Werner Erhard also, right?
Well, yes, yeah. And he wanted to help end hunger by the year 2000, and we didn't get there.
We did not. I've noticed.
Yes. So there's still a long way to go, and oftentimes it's been a political agenda that has stopped that movement of what Bucky called politicians are often the blood clots to the free flow of goods and services.
That's an interesting metaphor. He had great metaphor. One of the problems is we only got an hour. Bucky could talk for 40 hours. We could talk for 40 hours easy on interesting avenue or aspects of all of this. But we want to make sure we get in, because we become sensitive of the time constraint of a 1 hour format. And you did bring in a video, right? And let's make sure we get that in, because we could talk and all of a sudden it's the end of the hour without realizing.
We'd love to show it.
So why don't you as they say, set it up, and we've got it to where it could come up. What is it doing? It's relating to the crucialness of electricity and so forth?
Right. The name of it is called There's No Energy Crisis, and we took that from Bucky's quote, there's no energy shortage, there's no energy crisis, it's a crisis of ignorance. That was his quote.
That I like, yeah.
He basically said that people, whether they be politicians or people in general, don't know the energy issues in depth, and if they did, they would realize there's actually plenty of energy for all of us forever if we just looked more broadly, especially into the renewable realm, instead of just being so committed to fossil fuels.
I wonder if we might just, before we run the tape, we're going to run it, if you take that, not just in energy, there is enough for all, and the major premise that came out of World Game is that we have a capability of providing for everybody within an ecological context that we did not have historically. The percentage of the world population that could be seen within a World Game assumption of the realities that exist and so forth, that transition out of history where there was always zero sum, not enough, scarcity, that was the model 200,000 years, and we crossed that line in his reckoning around 1970. In a sense, he was asserting we were transcending material scarcity as an ontologic reality. And it's never mentioned. It's never mentioned anywhere that this gigantic transformation has taken place that might make possible a peaceful living situation that is not characteristic of history, I'm here to say I think that ought to be on the wall of every think tank as well. So it's not just energy, it's the whole interconnected ability to provide for all human beings with an ecological context that would open up on a liberating context, but all our institutions are outdated by that. I just want to make that point. But I wondered, Willie, maybe we could set up and run that DV. It's about 5 minutes
yes.
or so, right? So maybe if we could run that now. It has to do largely with electricity. We're talking about Buckminster Fuller with these gentlemen who are colleagues of him. So run that tape now then, please. Okay.
Life in the 21st century requires enormous amounts of energy, specifically electrical energy. A commodity as precious as water, it is the very foundation upon which our quality of life is built. Without it, living day to day can be difficult. 1/3 of our planet, 2 billion people, have little or no access to electricity at all. In their quest for an improved way of life, these populations are migrating to urban centers, creating megacities whose infrastructures are already stressed. The projections are sobering. Increasing population growth over the coming decades will further strain our electric resources, and the widening gap between developed and developing countries will add pressure as emerging nations seek to access electricity any way they can in order to raise their living standards. A high-end lifestyle has a significant environmental cost. 80% of our electrical production causes some kind of pollution or toxic waste. The fossil fuels of oil, coal, and gas, which provide so much of our electrical power, will deplete over the next century and are already becoming more and more expensive as dwindling supplies meet increasing demands. The continued use of polluting fuels as our primary energy supply is causing a global climate change with disastrous effects transcending political borders. It will be a high price to pay for all of us. Many are asking, is this our fate? Or is there another option? Let us first ask a bigger question. How do we provide a decent standard of living for everyone on the planet in an environmentally sustainable way? This is the question the 20th century engineer and inventor, Dr. R. Buckminster Fuller, asked over 30 years ago as he developed the World Games simulation. The solution that emerged from this investigation is elegant in its simplicity and provoking in its complexity. The strategy? The highest priority is to interconnect the electric power networks between regions and nations with an emphasis on tapping local and remote renewable energy resources. We believe he was right, but urgency is now called for. Presently, power grids link half the nations of the world. These are literally the freeway for electrons and enable our high quality of life. Technological advancements of this century have extended the reach of these grids to thousands of kilometers, far beyond the political boundaries of nations and the thinking of most world leaders. Sharing electricity through power grids allows utilities in neighboring nations to link east to west, leveling time zone peaks and valleys. Seasonal variations in north-south demand also make high-voltage interconnections beneficial to both the buyer and the seller. And while our current fossil fuel supplies will ultimately diminish, clean, renewable resources of wind, solar, hydro, geothermal, tidal, and biomass are abundant and will never run out. Yet, we are only using a small fraction of the available renewable energy on our planet. They are abundant beyond our needs, if we choose. It has begun in small measure. Some nations are already utilizing their renewable resources. Scandinavia and South America tap hydropower. Germany and India are developing wind. The United States uses biomass energy. Geothermal is expanding around the Pacific Rim. Given a choice, why would a country continue down the path of pollution when the road to renewable is so clear? Consider the effects of linking our renewable energy resources around the world. It will elevate the living standard of those without access to power. It will reduce pollution from fossil and nuclear production. It will stabilize population growth and reduce world hunger. And it will enhance trade, cooperation, and peace between nations. No new technology needs to be invented. This is doable today. Our planet's growth is assured. The outcome is not. Many leaders support this strategy on a global scale. We invite you to become involved in this global initiative. GENI, Global Energy Network Institute, is a non-profit research and education initiative promoting the integration of power grids between nations and continents with an emphasis on tapping local and remote renewable energy resources.
Hey, that's really good. That's well put together. Genie, what a great name. The genies should be out of that bottle, right? Congratulations. That's a well put together.
Well done by an organization, the Earth Vision Productions in San Diego, with Ashley Gardner as their lead, and we want to acknowledge them for a well done piece.
And you got Mr. Fuller in there, which is very good. I think you can do better than letting the young people know about Fuller. They don't know about him nearly enough.
Exactly.
He was the major figure that would have embodied the spirit of what was, you could call it, just for want of a better term, the spirit of the Woodstock era, the 60s. He embodied that more than any other single human being, and that the young people now will not know his name all too often or will have picked up on him is a shame. That ought to be reversed, in my humble opinion.
But I also have the experience of interns that I work with that come to our office that are incredibly bright, computer literate, and they are aware of issues beyond what I was coming out of school, and because they've been paying attention. I mean, they're clearly aware of the climate issue intimately and what's going on, and many of them are not slackers at all. They are very committed to doing what they can do. I've had students that have done research on the renewable energy potential of India and China, where we then market, or if you will, sent that to the leaders of both of those countries so that they knew personally what their own renewable energy potential was. To the Middle East, North Africa nations right now, they're considering nuclear power as an option. A lot of it because of Iran's movement toward a nuclear facility. You have many of the Middle Eastern nations all going down that path. We had another student that did really look at the options of the huge solar potential which exists throughout the northern African, Middle Eastern region, literally enough to power all the world. If you take a square 200 miles on its edge, that's not a very big square of desert, just 3% of the world's desert.
A lot of desert.
There's a lot of deserts on the planet.
And you can put it with those transmission. You can transmit it from those kind of areas to the areas where the people are.
Exactly. There's enough solar radiation hitting that 200-mile edged square to power all the electrical needs of the world today.
Okay. What about you? What do you think? Your people you're dealing with, you got young people in your bailiwick that are doing that and that kind of thing. And I just want to, James Lovelock, Gaia,
yes,
he now favors atomic energy, as do I. I don't think we should just so write off atomic energy because it's not polluting. But what about the people that you run into, young people? Do they seem to be, most importantly, cognizant of the pattern that was presented, a paradigm-shifting pattern that was presented by the personage of Buckminster Fuller and the people which were around him when he was with us? What do you think? My sense is lots of people have never heard his name, and it's a shame. They should, because they're looking for people with visionary perceptions that come out of that period or come out of this modern experience. What is your perception?
That is also my perception. In other words, at the turn of the century and the turn of the millennium, We've lost a lot of youth. We should have had a little bit more drive in that particular direction to involve the young people. In the 70s, during the last energy crisis, there were a lot more youth involved in kind of a miniature revolution.
Yeah.
And that's what we need.
And we had a revolutionary thing with Bobby Diller. Remember Bobby Diller when he was in his prime and he was saying there's something blowing in the wind, and there was a thing that was coming across the country. There was something in the air. There was a major change, a liberation, not a muddling through, not a making peace with the past, not a muddling through in that which history tries to do, but an idea that there's a massive paradigm shifting moment in the evolution of big events that was part of the air. The spirit of that period, the right-wing reactionary will just say it was sex and drugs and rock and roll. There was a lot more going on, and we've lost that among the youth, and they're looking for something. I think they could do very well to pick up on the pioneer-setting pace of him the same way the world picked up on the pioneering enlightenment of, let's say, Galileo and Copernicus revolution, scientific. We're coming to the end of a geocentric view of the universe to a heliocentric view of the universe, and that's what we remember. That's the pattern we remember from that era. And the pattern we remember from Buckminster Fuller, the pattern, not the details of what could be done here, there. The pattern is that I think in a sense it could be summed up, we are transcending material scarcity as an ontologic reality, and it's never, never mentioned. I really think you need a pattern that can grasp the public and the massive consciousness of the people in a pattern way, so that the details of what might be done in one thing or another, but we need something like that in order to wake them up. Maybe this movie about Wall-E, where humanity has been wiped out as they try to muddle through, you know, that sort. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I understand completely.
Do you think we're at a time of existential significance where we need a really large inspirational boost to the consciousness of the people of this planet that's not being provided currently?
Yes, and I think you need to go back to the books of Buckminster Fuller. You mentioned a couple, Utopia or Oblivion, his other book on the critical path, and also Operating Manual for Spaceship Earth.
Isn't that a great term? Yeah. We don't have one.
No, but we do need one. And Bucky, in many ways, shared his concerns with us as a population, as a world community. And he lectured all over the world. He did modeling in all the schools of architecture within the United States.
Yeah, he did.
He took a time period to do that.
At hours long, and it was all a matter of, and he would talk, and people want declarative sentences, you know, like legal. And he would just loop out with including all kinds of things in a large pattern kind of way, and we don't have much of that. Your thing is moving that direction, and he is, and I'm really happy, aren't you, with the Whitney show that might begin to breathe interest into the people of the real spirit of what was going on at that time, because 1970 was when the weapons systems became species lethal. All the modeling tells us. 1970 was the year in which we were transcending scarcity in terms there were more haves and have-nots for the first time in 200,000 years of human history. 1970 was the beginning of public access cable television, I would submit, that's worked out a unique financing for communication, the DN, where the ideas are going to be able to come out in a massive way other than reifying the outdated institutions. So I think the spirit of Buckminster Fuller, 1970, can be revisited and brought up into youth in a massive way. I hope this Wall-E movie might help get us into that kind of a way of thinking rather than muddling through, which is the tendency of too many of our institutions. We only got a couple minutes left. Literally a couple minutes. Okay. Maybe you could get a few words into what you think.
Well, I know one of the quotes that always sticks with me is that with Bucky, he said we oftentimes have to emerge through emergency. That it requires a hit across the head for us to wake up.
Got to hit that mule upside the head with the 2x4.
To get us to change. And we're getting there late in the game on climate change, because this is an issue that has been, unfolding over 5 decades. I went to Revelle College at UCSD. Roger Revelle was one of the original guys that raised the warning flag, along with Charles Keeling and his Keeling curve. And so now I will say the emergency is upon us. James Hansen here in New York has basically said, if we don't go back from 383 parts per million to 350 parts per million in CO2, we're toast. That was his testimony to the Congress, just to the Senate committee just last week.
I think they had it on C-SPAN or something.
Yes, they did.
Thank God for C-SPAN.
Yes, they did. So we are at this emergency point right now, and you now have sustainability initiatives in almost every university in America that I'm aware of. You have sustainability leaders in cities. Mayor Bloomberg is initiating those in New York with the taxi drivers, with mandated recycling. Now, it's all in the right direction, but I will assert that it's the low-hanging fruit, that we really need this design science revolution that Bucky talked about. To do comprehensive anticipatory design science really makes you look at all systems that we are using today, all resources that we're using, and figure out how do we actually use regenerative universe, recycling universe, rather than, if you will, burning down the house to keep the house warm, which is what we're doing today.
Yeah, very good. Or using up the seed corn. And we're all heading in the information. Carbon 60s around over the horizon. It's going to go beyond the silicon chip. It's going to be molecular computing. There's exponential increasings in terms of bandwidth capability that's coming. So all these things are coming, and he's a good and wonderful person to repair to get some grounding on principles that I'm afraid aren't very well understood by the political or even the business leaders, as far as I can see. I think we need something new in the realm of the design of economic assumptions about the organization of capital formation and distribution of income that is not adequate coming out of our history. The economics is not, we haven't got the right economics in a large pattern way yet. We got some questions to answer. And gentlemen, you two, and Mr. Fuller has been a major one who brought some of those questions to good focus, and you two follow on that, and I appreciate it very much. And thank goodness they got this wonderful show at the Whitney Museum, able to be seen to celebrate the man and your work in a way by extension. And I thank you really very much for coming in. It's a great pleasure talking to you both. I wish you all the very best. Safe trips home to your respective paradise climate places, Hawaii and San Diego. And thanks a whole lot for coming in. It's a great pleasure talking to you.
Harold, thank you.
My pleasure. It's your pleasure to have their perceptions. I think we're just about coming up to where we can start running the credits and let them have that. And have a good trip back. How long are you going to be in town for now?
Another day.
Another day, and you?
Same with me. I leave tomorrow at noon.
Glad we could catch you before you got on the plane. And what do you say? You say aloha?
Aloha.
Aloha. What does that mean? Is that a literal translation, or?
Yes, it comes from the Hawaiian spirit. Ha means it's a way of greeting, and it's a way of saying goodbye. Yes.
All right, that's good.
And mahalo.
Mahalo? What's that
thank
mean?
you.
Means thank you.
That means thank you? How you know that? Because you're halfway to Hawaii.
I've visited Hawaii a couple times.
You've been there. I understand it's kind of a place of, a lot of people from California like to go out there and say it's there, constructive. And that was a jumping off place. Fuller spent a lot of time out in California. There's a lot of things going on in Silicon Valley and that sort of thing. So thanks a lot for all the work. Welcome to New York for your stay. Come back often. It's a good town, and thank you very much for all your contributions and everything. We got to stay in touch with one another.
You will.
And we can do some television. We can call you on. We can call you like a telephone call in the United States, way out across the Pacific, right?
Yes, you
can. I can call you like I can call Brooklyn.
It's in America, right?
Boy, it's a big change from when they said we haven't heard from Benjamin Franklin in London. It took 3 months to send a letter.